James Degale. Caleb Truax is the new IBF super middleweight world champion. Caleb Truax is the new IBF super middleweight world champion. Caleb Truax. Depressing fight to watch. First and foremost, I didn't score the fight. I didn't score the fight for no other reason than I thought it was such easy work for James Degale that I didn't really bother sitting there with a pen and paper trying to mark it round by round. I didn't think it was really going to be that kind of fight. My impression was that Caleb Truax won the fight. I believe he landed by far the more meaningful work. I believe he hurt Degale, and I believe he had the better of it for the majority of the fight. I don't think James Degale can have any complaints about the result in this fight. I thought it was an appalling performance from James Degale. I thought it was an appalling performance. One of the worst performances I can immediately recall from a fighter of Degale's talent and skill set to put in a performance that bad. It was utterly woeful, and Caleb Truax was a deserved winner. I mean, Caleb Truax, for me, going into this fight, is not someone I would have considered a top 20 super middleweight. He's probably not someone I'd have considered a top 30 or 40 super middleweight. But he's given Degale a bit of a beating in there. You know, he really, really has. I mean, let's talk about the fight. Degale, for me, he looked awkward in the first round or two. I thought he won the first round or two, probably, but I thought he was awkward. He was struggling to find his range. He wasn't really jabbing. He was constantly on his back foot. He wasn't holding his feet at all. He wasn't really landing much of note. When he did land punches, and this was something throughout the course of the fight, when he did land punches, he really didn't press home his advantage. He'd land punches, he'd put punches together. It looked like he could potentially have Caleb Truax in trouble, and then he just backed off him. You know, he just backed off him. When Caleb Truax was on the front foot, he came forward. He positioned James Degale. He pushed him back to the ropes. He put punches together in bunches. He caught Degale. He hurt Degale. You know, Truax was the fighter who was pressing home the advantage when he landed good work. James Degale would land a decent punch, and then he'd back straight off. It was as if James Degale had a magnet on his back that was linked to the turnbuckles, to the corners. You know, it was a bizarre performance. He'd be in a corner, he'd wheel out of the corner, and then instantly gravitate at a rate of knots to the opposite corner. I mean, at no point did he look to hold his feet. And when he was going backwards, he wasn't able to land anything of note. You know, you didn't see Degale going backwards, catching and timing. You saw Degale going backwards, not throwing punches, just being positioned into a corner. Look, we saw Anthony Yarde fight earlier on in the card. Yarde was up against the ropes. He was riding shots and coming up with an uppercut. He was riding shots and dropping a hook to the body. Degale had nothing with his back to the ropes, yet he continually persisted to get driven back, sit in the corner, sit on the ropes, and do nothing. Then wheel out and be pushed back to the other corner. Where was the jab to keep range? You know, it was so frustrating to watch. We know what a talent James Degale is. It was an appalling performance from James Degale. I've been a James Degale fan for years. You know, long-time subscribers will know that James Degale is one of my favourite fighters. I've constantly rated Degale and hyped Degale. I didn't even really do a pre-fight video for this fight because I didn't see it as a fight that really was worthy of discussion. And the performance he's put in is just absolutely woeful. I mean, it beggars belief. How many jabs did he land on Caleb Truax the entire fight? You know, Degale, there was something terribly, terribly wrong with James Degale tonight, and I don't know what it was. You know, my inclination looking at the fight is that he's got old overnight. It's that the Badou Jack fight has aged him. The Badou Jack fight has taken something away from him that maybe he won't get back. I mean, how old is James Degale? Let me type it into box right now. Is he 31? Yeah, he's 31 years old. He looked old in there. There looked to be like a lot of miles in the clock. He'd lost speed. He'd lost snap. He'd lost defence. He'd lost reactions. I thought he'd lost reactions. He looked like half the fighter he was from previous fights. And Caleb Truax, you know, immense credit goes to him for winning this fight on merit, but he's a basic fighter. This is the same Caleb Truax who was beaten up and knocked out by Daniel Jacobs. This is the same Caleb Truax who was knocked out early by Anthony Degale, the lesser Degale brother. You know, and Caleb Truax, age 34, a middleweight and looking small in there, has done a job on James Degale, hurt James Degale, roughed James Degale up, and you know, really beaten him. James Degale had very, very little in there. He was so negative. You know, even in the later rounds when it looked like he was starting to come back into the fight and he was getting his work off a little bit more, he would just land something and then go straight back into the corner. It really was frustrating. He looked like he'd lost a massive step. I mean, I don't know if he was struggling with the southpaw stance of Truax. He seemed to be having some problem with his footwear and slipping on the canvas. I don't know if it was ring rust, but my inclination is the slippage that we saw in that fight was so substantial and so vast that it's that the Badou Jack beating, that Badou Jack brutal 12-round fight, has taken something out of him. You know, that combined with aging, combined with inactivity, has taken something out of him, because that was not the James Degale that we have seen, even in James Degale's lesser performances. You know, that was miles off. It really was. One of the most frustrating performances. You know, I like Jim McDonnell. He's a good trainer. I like someone I respect. James Degale said to Jim McDonnell, "I'm winning this fight, right?" And Jim McDonnell said, "Yeah. Like, that's not the advice you need to be giving your fighter in a fight like this." Degale was behind, and he was behind badly. And he needed to be told, round 5, round 6, you need to start winning every round or you need a knockout here, because you know, you are getting worked. You've got a guy who's the smaller guy coming forward relentlessly. You've spent the whole fight with your back to the ropes. You haven't established a jab. You haven't hurt him. You haven't rocked him. You're busted. You're bloody. You know, he's had you dipping with punches in rounds 5, I think it was. And yet Degale giving the message from his corner that he was winning the fight. You know, really poor stuff. And Degale should have known better himself. You know, he's an experienced fighter, Olympic gold medalist, world champion with multiple defences. He's been in big fights. He should have known better. It's not just the corner's fault, but I thought the corner could have done more to put a rocket up his arse. And yeah, a really odd performance. You know, Degale looking like he'd lost everything, looking like he was half the man we've seen in previous fights. Yeah, very frustrating fight to watch, and a fight that actually hurts me to watch, being a huge James Degale fan. You know, Caleb Truax, he's not become a world beater overnight. You know, this is the same man who got beaten by Jermaine Taylor, who got beaten by Anthony Degale, who got beaten by Daniel Jacobs. This is a guy who's not a super middleweight. This is a guy, yeah, who doesn't have notable wins on his resume. At 34 years old, he hasn't become a world beater. Degale has just lost to a guy who would have got wiped out by Callum Smith. Who'd have got, you know, I'd have picked Rocky Fielding to beat this guy. Chris Eubank Jr. would smash this guy to pieces. You know, you look at the position, you look at the trouble Caleb Truax had James Degale in tonight. You look at how Truax bullied Degale, positioned him on the ropes, worked him, you know, punched him to the body, roughed him up. Imagine if that was Eubank in there. Eubank would have probably stopped Degale. You know, that was a low point in James Degale's career. I don't even know if he can bounce back from that. I do not know if he can bounce back from that. Regardless of whether some people will say Degale deserved to sneak it. You know, one of the judges had it a draw. Doesn't matter if Degale won that fight. It doesn't matter if he'd sneaked it by a point. I think justice was done. But the performance from Degale really does make me question whether he's got anything left to give. Because, you know, that Caleb Truax is a basic fighter. He's not a world level fighter. He's not an elite level fighter. And he has well and truly beaten James Degale up for my money. Not a happy boxing fan and Degale fan watching that performance. It gives me a lot more questions than answers. You know, I'm recording this video immediately after the final bell. I'm in a bit of a state of shock, as you guys can probably tell. So I haven't heard any post-fight interviews. I haven't heard any post-fight analysis. Be very interesting to see what comes out of that. But yeah, Degale put in a terribly flat performance. Was it ring rust? Was it the southpaw stance? Was it inactivity? Was it the injury? I don't know. But that is a hard performance to come back from. Lee Selby won. Lee Selby won in the co-main event. Credit to Lee Selby, another guy who is a top talent. I thought Selby again kind of had a bit of a fight in first gear. He beat Eduardo Ramirez, who weighed in substantially overweight for the fight. Selby beat him in a clear but competitive fight. The opponent, Ramirez, undefeated Mexican fighter, had spells in the fight, had moments of success. But Selby definitely deserved to win. But again, I thought Selby struggled to go through the gears. I thought Selby kind of fought the fight like it was a sparring mode. I thought it was a frustrating performance from Selby. I don't know if Degale and Selby got these opponents in at very late notice, and they thought it was going to be an easy Christmas payday. They thought it was just a sort of run out and knockover job before Christmas. I don't know if that's what the attitude was, but I thought both of them looked flat. I don't know if either of them had overlooked their opponent. I mean, Degale far worse than Selby, don't get me wrong, but even Selby, I thought, he looked uninspiring in there. Sometimes Selby does put in these kind of performances because he's, a very technical fighter, very, the way he fights isn't always explosive, but it was frustrating to watch. You felt the crowd going dead, etc. It was kind of in contrast to what we saw on the undercard, and I did live commentary on the undercard earlier, so the analysis of those fights are already up. I'm not going to talk about them in depth, but Daniel Dubois stops darts in 2 rounds. Anthony Yarde stops Nicholas's locker in 4 rounds. Those guys, hell of a lot more explosive, a hell of a lot more motivated and more on the ball than the 2 main eventers in Selby and Degale. For what it's worth, Anthony Yarde, it was a step-up fight. He took punches for the first time in his career. But I was impressed. I was impressed by the way he got that guy out of there, a guy who'd never been stopped, a guy who'd competed at a much higher level, fought the likes of Arthur Abraham, Callum Smith, etc. Yes, Yarde's a light heavyweight and the guy's been a career super middleweight. Yes, his locker was now 39, but I thought Yarde looked good in there. Sometimes you wonder if he's got too much focus on style rather than substance. Sometimes all of that shoulder rolling stuff, you wonder if it's the most effective and efficient way of conducting his boxing. But he's got real good movement, real good athleticism, good technique, good power, and he's just stopped a guy who's competed at a very high level. Credit goes to him for that. Looking to see his continued progress. Dubois, I thought he looked a bit overeager tonight. I thought he was looking for that right hand too early and with too much regularity. It was quite predictable. Sometimes he was leaving himself a little bit open when he was throwing with it. I'd like to see him be a bit more selective with his timing of that punch. But Dubois, just stopped throwing darts in 2 rounds, age 20. Credit goes to him. We know he's got a good jab. We know he's got good power. We know he's got good timing. Darts just didn't have anything for him. Maybe we'll talk more about these fights tomorrow. We'll certainly talk more about them in the podcast. But James Degale, wow. I cannot believe one of the most disappointing performances in memory from a fighter of his class and his pedigree. To be that poor, to be that lacking in strategy, in fundamentals, to have so little in the way of tactical awareness, to have so little in the way of jabs. You've got to question if there's too many miles in the clock. Fighters do get old overnight in the sport of boxing. It's a brutal sport, and that you get James Degale Badujak fight, who knows what impact that's had. Let me know your thoughts, people. Leave your comments in the section below. If you've enjoyed the content, please hit the thumbs up button. If you haven't done so before, do subscribe so you can check out all of my stuff. Lomachenko versus Rigondeaux post-fight review will be coming Sunday morning. Thanks for tuning in.